Hi, everyone. I'm Selene Rodriguez, the Policy Director for the Secure and Sovereign Frontier campaign here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Today, I am joined by a very special guest for the first time in our studio, the first ever Texas Border Czar, Mike Banks.
Hi, and like Selene said, my name is Michael Banks, and I am the first Texas Border Czar, and proudly serving the governor of Texas and trying to do everything we can to secure the border.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, there's a lot going on at the border that needs to be addressed, and the biggest thing that I really want us to take advantage of today is fixing the narrative. There's a lot of political divide between the crisis at the border right now, but if anyone can speak to what's going on and why we're even in this situation today, I'm pretty sure that's you. So first, I want to start. Your official title is the Special Advisor on Border Matters, aka Border Czar. So can you first tell us a little bit about your background and why the governor tapped you for this position and why there was even a need for it in the first place?
Sure. So I started out my service to the country in the U.S. Navy. Spent 10 years in the Navy. The majority of that time was in a law enforcement capacity. And as a law enforcement officer in the military has been supporting border missions since there's been a border. So I spent a large portion of my military time on the border working with both Border Patrol and Customs at the port of entries. After 10 years service in the military, I got out and went straight into the United States Border Patrol. I served in the Border Patrol for a little over 23 years. I served in numerous positions. I've served in California, I've served in Arizona, and I've served in Texas. My last two assignments, I was the Deputy Chief of Operational Programs at U.S. Border Patrol Headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then I got back home to Texas for my final assignment, which I was the patrol agent in charge of the Wesco Border Patrol Station in Wesco, Texas.
Interesting there. I'd like to know, you served in different states in your time with Border Patrol. What's the difference between those states and Texas when it comes to border security?
So right now the difference is Texas is the only state along the border that is stepping up and doing anything to actually secure the border. The other states have just accepted that it's the federal government's responsibility. If they're not going to do anything about it, oh well, we're not going to do anything about it. And Texas, we're not going to stand for that, right? We're going to protect Texas and protect the United States. And so we're stepping up. And as we get further into discussion, I can explain how OLS came about and what our purpose is and what we're attempting to do. But we're not going to just sit back and let the U.S. government succeed our border to Mexico or anyone else that just wants to cross the border without going through the proper legal pathway.
Right. So the huge influx that we're seeing, these past few weeks, even in Arizona, you would say that Texas has taken a much different approach to these types of influxes.
A much different approach.
Oh, well, good for us. I'm happy to hear that. So Operation Lone Star began in March 2021, correct?
Correct.
Can you tell us briefly, what is Operation Lone Star?
Okay. So Operation Lone Star originally started out. So I want to tell you what Lone Star was and what it has evolved into. And so Operation Lone Star originally started because the Biden administration dismantled every policy that was in place that secured the border. In my 23 years in the Border Patrol, 10 years in the military working on the border, I'd never seen a less secure border than what we had under this administration. The previous administration, it was the most secure I'd ever seen. And the reason being is the prior administration came in and asked the experts, the subject matter experts, the Border Patrol agents on the ground, right? The union that serves the members, that asked the leadership, what do you need to secure this border? And then that presidency went out, and that president went out and delivered those things to us, gave us the policies, things like what you commonly hear referred to as Remain in Mexico, which is really Safe Third Country. It's just, they just gave it a different name, and we can get into that a little later. But so OLS, we started seeing these massive gaps. So what you had was Border Patrol agents were pulled off the line to go process. So these are law enforcement officers, right, that are supposed to be out on the line protecting the border in between the port of entries. And what you now have is they're all sitting around processing because of the overwhelming numbers of migrants that are coming across, because the Biden administration's policy is come one, come all, don't worry about the law, right? They are encouraging this mass illegal immigration is what they're doing. And so just the exact opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. So you had these large gaps. And when you have large gaps, the cartels are going to exploit those gaps. And something that the audience really needs to understand is that nothing crosses the U.S.-Mexican border without going through a cartel. They control all illicit trade on that border. And so what you have is the cartels have weaponized mass migration and used it to tie the hands of the Border Patrol agents. So now they are busy, right? They don't have anyone to put out. I mentioned that one of my last assignments was a patrol agent in charge of the Wesco Border Patrol Station. There were days where there was 36 miles of border that I did not put an agent on because I did not have an agent to put it on there. So if anybody tells you there's not massive swaths of U.S. border where there is zero presence, then they're either in denial or they just don't know. But the fact is, there are mass swaths. So what the state of Texas did was says, well, we can't have this because we know that when you leave these massive sections open, the cartels are going to exploit those, and they're going to push their narcotics through. They're going to push their high value targets through. There was just an article a couple of weeks ago where it was reported that ISIS has a smuggling route through Mexico, which we've already known, and that they've smuggled 250 special interest aliens through the Mexican border, and the U.S. government's only been able to find about 15 since they realized, wait a minute, we probably should have held on to these. So these massive gaps were open. State of Texas saw a need to fill those for the safety of Texans and then the rest of the country. So they created OLS, and the purpose of OLS was to plug those gaps in order to prevent, this nefarious activity from coming across, this illegal activity coming across and affecting Texas and the rest of the United States. So as the Biden administration doubled down on these policies that aren't working, the gaps got wider. And so DPS was pretty much responsible for all of it. The Department of Public Safety, they were responsible for filling these gaps. The gaps came too large just for DPS to do it by themselves. So then they added in Texas military. So Texas military came on board, the Texas National Guard, they came on board and started helping plug those gaps as well. And so ultimately what's happened is the mission became more than just a small operation to plug some small gaps. It turned into this large operation to plug these large gaps. And so I was asked to come on because they wanted a subject matter expert in border security that has a lot of border security experience that could come and kind of be that conduit for all the agencies to go through, right? We're building wall, which we'll get into a little later, but we're building, permanent structural wall. So Texas Facilities Commission is doing that, right? We are doing busing, which we'll get into a little later. The Texas Department of Emergency Management is involved in that. So you've got a lot of departments involved in the border security mission, and so it grew into a large mission now, if you will. And so I was asked to come on and help, coordinate that mission and kind of be the go-between between the Office of the Governor and the different agencies that are out there on the line doing the work.
Right. Sounds like a job that we really needed to be filled.
I agree.
And legislation similar to that, the TPPF supported during the regular session. So we're very happy to see you come on board, sir.
Thank you.
To Operation Lone Star, as of last Friday, we've had over 473,900 illegal immigrant apprehensions under the operation. Can you explain what does apprehensions mean? And does that mean that everybody gets charged with some sort of criminal arrest? How does that work?
So 473,000 plus apprehensions. I think the first and most important part of that stat is that that's 470,000 people that didn't get away. And for those in the audience that don't understand what a got-away is, that is when the government, whether it be state of Texas or the federal government, detect an entry into the country. Now, whether that entry is detected via camera, whether it's seen by an agent from afar, or whether they go through old-fashioned sign cutting where they can go back and determine that someone came through. 1.9 million in the last 2.5 years, 1.9 million. So I like to ask this question.
That we know about.
That we know of. That's
right.
What we know of, right? That's where we've seen or spotted or recorded someone entering the country illegally, and we weren't able to effect an apprehension or make an arrest. And so I think the key point on that is that if right now the Biden administration's policy is come in, turn yourself into Border Patrol, and we will process you and release you, why would 1.9 million people risk their lives crossing out in the deserts, crossing in more dangerous areas?
Right.
Why would they not turn themselves into the Border Patrol? Because they're not amenable to release, meaning that they have something that prevents them from being released. And a lot of times it's either because they're smuggling narcotics or it's because they have criminal records, right? And so while we can't tell you exactly how many of the known gotaways, 473,000 plus less gotaways because OLS is out there preventing that and stopping it. But I want to be very clear. The number one mission of OLS is to prevent the entries from even happening.
Right.
Our intent is to be at the border, at the line, stop the migrants from coming into the country illegally, direct them to the port of entry where they can go apply through whatever pathway the federal government chooses to set up. But those 470 people that got through our line and were able to get into the U.S. and we were able to apprehend them. Of those, a little over 35,000 have been charged criminally with a little over 32,000 felony charges from that. And so the other part of your question was you asked about criminal trespass, right?
Right.
Which is one of the things that we have in our our I'll say bag of tricks, but in our
toolbox.
Our toolbox, in order to be able to do that, is that a lot of landowners, right, were in fear. They had people coming in their homes, breaking in their homes, on ranches. They were in fear, so they agreed that they wanted to prosecute anyone that came on their property for criminal trespass. And so we have that in some locations. We even have entire cities that have come on with criminal trespass. Eagle Pass is a perfect example. In Eagle Pass, the mayor signed an affidavit allowing for anyone that entered the state of Texas in Eagle Pass on city property that they would prosecute for criminal trespass. And so we don't have that option everywhere, but where we do have it, it has shown to be a deterrent, and it's decreased traffic significantly.
Right. And to note to that, we were actually in Eagle Pass last week on Friday, and DPS gave us an incredible tour. They spent about 3 hours with us. They let us really see what the state is doing. And something that I found very powerful was a group rushed into the river, and they came and they were yelling, we need a cross, we need a cross. It was just a random point on the river, and National Guard went up, about 10 or 15 of them, and they said, this border is closed. This area of the border is closed. You may not cross here. You have to seek legal pathways. And I think that just really speaks to the fact that Texas is trying to do something. They could have just said, okay, here, go ahead. There's a ramp right there. But they didn't do that. And DPS stood in the back and they supported that. So it's really incredible to see it. It's unfortunate that we need that kind of a force right now because we haven't before. But it shows a lot to what the state of Texas is willing to do to protect not just our sovereignty, but the people that live here.
I agree. And what I think everyone needs to understand, right, is that border security is national security, right? And Texas is going to do its part. We're going to do our part in protecting Texas, and by protecting Texas, protecting the rest of the United States. You'll often hear the claim that the large majority of migrants that are crossing the border don't want to stay in border towns, right? Well, the reason being is that every couple of years a new administration comes in, and then they want to go back to being heavy on enforcement. So who wants to stay inside of an area on the border where enforcement may be a priority in a year and a half? But that doesn't mean they don't want to stay in Texas. We see a lot of migrants, when you interview them, they will tell you that they're going to San Antonio, or they're going to Dallas, or they're going to Houston. The bottom line is we're a welcoming country. We're a country of migrants, right? But you have to come in the right way. I'll welcome anybody into my home, but you need to knock on my door and let me find out who you are before I invite you into my home.
Yes, exactly. Expanding on Operation Lone Star, the newest part of that initiative is, as you mentioned earlier, the busing program. We've bused people to LA, Denver, Chicago, New York, mostly. So can you speak to that? Because the big narrative is that Texas is the one inhumanely moving all of these people throughout the country, even though these sanctuary cities and states have said that they'll take them, which now they don't want to because they see the strain on the resources. But what is going on with the transportation of people from the border throughout the rest of the country, and what role exactly does the state have to play in that?
Okay, and so a couple things I want to clear up on the busing is, yes, the state of Texas is busing migrants to sanctuary cities. But the first thing we need to understand is these are migrants that have already entered into the country illegally. They've already been processed by the United States Border Patrol, and they've already been processed for release. They've been given a notice to appear, released on their own recognizance. And so the whole reason we started busing was that border towns asked us, can you help us? We need some relief. We need to be able to get these migrants out of our cities. Our cities are overwhelmed. You talked about being in Eagle Pass last week. Eagle Pass, 28,000. That's the population of Eagle Pass, plus or minus a few hundred, about 28,000. They had over 50,000 migrants in a week. 50,000 migrants. They doubled the population of that city in a week. They don't have a Greyhound busing system. They don't have the transportation system in and out, at least at the level you would see in a city like El Paso, or like you would see in Austin or San Antonio. And so there's very limited need for transportation in and out of those cities, so they don't have those. And so what you have is you have these migrants lingering because, yes, they've been processed, they've been handed over to a non-governmental organization, Catholic Charities, or whoever it may be, that is helping them get onto their destination with help of the federal FEMA, of course. but they don't have the system in place to be able to push those migrants out. Nor can the city afford to put that system in place because they don't need it for a city of 28,000. So the city's asked us, the state, can you help us get these migrants? And so we said, sure, as long as they're willing, or as long as they're going to one of these other locations and they're not stopping in Texas. We're not busing them around Texas. And so first and foremost, there was a need to do it to provide relief to our border communities and something I wanted to say earlier that I didn't say is that not only have I been on the border for 23 years, but I've raised my 2 children on the border, right? They grew up on the border, and I see how these type of policies affect us. You look at Brownsville when it was getting overwhelmed in early May. The cities cannot withstand that level of an influx. So first and foremost, it was done at the request from the cities for assistance. And then the second option was no migrant is forced on a bus. We ask them where they're going, and they're choosing those cities. So I'm going to use New York City as an example, right? So we've got a mayor in New York City that says things like, the immigration crisis is going to destroy New York City. His words. The mean man down in Texas is destroying New York by sending these migrants there. But I'm going to give you a few numbers that I think are real important. As of Friday, today's Tuesday, so as of Friday, 4 days ago, the state of New York had received 155,000 and some change migrants. How many do you think they received from the state of Texas?
Less than half?
Way less than half, about 20,000. So a little less than 20,000 actually. So the city of New York, who has advertised itself as a sanctuary city, has challenged anyone that says we need to secure our border, right? And says, no, we'll take them. Is surprised that 155,000 migrants want to come to New York City. Every migrant that the state of Texas bused to New York City, that's where they were going anyway. We just helped them get there faster so that they weren't draining the resources out of the state of Texas from Texans. Right. And so I find it hypocritical that a mayor will stand on TV and blame Texas for destroying New York City, right? Everybody wants to be a sanctuary city until they have to start doing sanctuary city stuff, right? But not one time did you hear him complain about where the other 135,000 migrants come from. And where did those other 135,000, the ones that are really taxing New York City, it's not the 20,000. I mean, New York City is one of the richest cities in the world. Not one of the richest cities in America, one of the richest cities in the world. And they can't handle less than 20,000 from the state of Texas. But you've got 3 of the poorest counties in the state of Texas, Star, Hidalgo, and Cameron, doing 6,000 to 8,000 a day. And New York City thinks that's okay and leave the border open. So I'm just shocked that Mayor Adams would feign how offended he is that migrants are coming to New York City when he's requesting them and advertising and soliciting for them to come there. But the other 135,000 came from President Joe Biden. It came from the federal government, right? Because the migrants get released to an NGO, right? The NGO gets reimbursed for the cost of taking these migrants in and getting to their destination from the federal government, from FEMA, right? And so the other 135,000 came from Joe Biden, for the President of the United States. It didn't come from the state of Texas. And so I think if New York City is reevaluating their status as a sanctuary city, which maybe they should, they need to be directing their anger and their frustration with the federal government, who is the ones that are opening the border, leaving it wide open through these disastrous policies they've created. And then, I mean, careful what you wish for, right? I mean, they asked for these migrants, and they're there. And so busing will continue so long as the borders are open, and they will continue going to sanctuary cities so long as the migrants are willing to go and they want to go there, right? I think that, you know what, why should the state of Texas, who doesn't have sanctuary cities, the state of Texas, who's trying to secure the border and stop the flow, right? Why should we take on that burden, and why should the people of Texas take on that burden when we're not the ones encouraging it and we're not the ones asking for it?
Right. And I was born and raised in Doro, Texas. So I know the small town, limited resource feel that you speak of to that. And I remember when all of this first started, we have one bus stop and it's right in the middle of town. And I remember I would go in to visit because my family and my husband's family is also there, and the bus stop would just be overcrowded. And my grandma actually uses that local bus stop often, and she just spent months where she didn't get to go because it was always so packed. So that is kind of the thing. They can't stay here, right. But what is the humane thing to do? And there are plenty of interviews of them coming across where they're saying that these big cities like New York, Cincinnati, Denver, LA are their final destination. Right. So we're not holding them here against their wishes, right? Like you said.
One thing I'd like to add, we talk about humanity. We talk about humane. How humane is it to create policies that encourage people to cross the Rio Grande River, right? Not just the fact that at a moment's notice, the current starts sweeping by quickly. And it doesn't have to be rain or flood here.
Right.
It can rain or flood 100 miles upriver, 1,200 miles upriver, and it's going to affect that river. How humane is it to encourage people to cross that river? Not only that, I mean, the water is not very clean on top of that, right? You're encouraging people by opening the border like this to take that extra risk to come across. That's not humane.
Or to send their kids across by themselves, right, or with coyotes.
And so that's what the other thing I was going to get into. Now you look at, want to talk about inhumane, right? We see the current administration always trying to point to humanity, okay? One of the least humane things I've ever seen, and it was probably the second to last reason why I decided I have to retire. I can't be a part of this anymore, referring to the Border Patrol, was there was a process in place called rapid DNA testing. And the reason why we did rapid DNA testing was because policies that say if you come with a child, you're going to get released, right? So what you have is a serious fraud family case down there. So what the cartel does is they take children away from their families by force. They come in, they have a baby factory. They literally have just babies after babies. They hand those babies over to a single male and say, here, this baby is yours. You're going to cross the border, right? They're going to release you. The next day, the U.S. Border Patrol catches the male at the checkpoint and says, well, where's the baby? Well, I gave him back. So they would rent these kids, come across pretending to be a family, get released. The person who was released, the migrant who was released, would hand that baby back to the cartel and then make his way north. How inhumane is that? So the previous administration, we put in a process, rapid DNA testing. We could test the DNA. And you want to talk about fraud families? We found an overwhelming majority of the migrants had zero DNA relation to that child, right? Once we started doing that, we saw the fraud families go away. And if anything, it didn't mean there wasn't other immigration fraud going on. But for us, we needed to stop these children from being used in this manner. And it was not uncommon to arrest a person with their child, bring them in and find out they're a convicted child sex predator or convicted child rapist, and convicted, and they're running around with someone else's kid that was forcibly taken from them by the cartel. So we saw a huge decrease, and we're like, okay, at least we're stopping that, right? We're taking one bite of the apple at a time. The current administration did away with rapid DNA testing. That was one of the first things they did. They're like, well, wait a minute, we can't have all this fraud family being detected, and so they did away with it. There is no more rapid DNA testing. So now, if you come across the border with a child, I have to take your word for it that child is yours, and I have to release you with that child. Right.
And I'll note with that, on October 4th, I think it was the highest daily record for unaccompanied children, which was 405, in one day. And we've seen throughout this month that number seems to be climbing. And as a parent, it breaks my heart to know these things and to see the images of the children that are coming across. Some of them look drugged. Some of them have a lot of fear in their eyes. So I think that's something really important that people need to be made more aware of. And
a lot of the common questions are, well, how come the Border Patrol agent doesn't realize that's the same kid coming over and over? Well, if the Border Patrol agent's working day shift and that kid comes with one fake father on day shift, the next day comes on swing shift, the next day comes on midnights, it may be 2 or 3 days before they spot that kid, right, and recognize. And then when you're dealing with 4,000 to 6,000 a day, are you really going to be able to remember the face of every child you see, with 4,000 to 6,000 a day? And the last thing I want to point out on humanity is, let's go back to the previous administration. Lowest number of migrant deaths in recorded history. Now let's look at the last 3 years under this administration. And I say 3 years because we're talking, the Border Patrol does their statistics on their fiscal year, not their annual year. But 654 first year in office, deaths of migrants trying to cross the border. It was the highest recorded number of deaths of migrants attempting to cross the border in the history of those statistics being kept. Last year, 856. So they broke a record in the number of deaths. Well, surprise, surprise, if you're encouraging this amount of migrants to come across and you have this level of death, that level of death continues proportionate to the numbers that are coming across. This year, 677 as of, and that's annual year or fiscal year as of October 1. So down a little bit from the previous year, but still, let's do the math. That's 1,300, that's 2,300 women, children, and families crossing the border and either dying in the desert or dying in the river, right? And we're talking about humanity? No, the humane way, right, is if you want to create policies and processes, have those policies and processes drive them through a port of entry and not drive them across the river. And so if anyone has any question about the humanity of what we're doing, every migrant that we convince not to cross that river by having OLs there is a life saved, and it's worth it.
Right. Thank you for that. As a Border Patrol agent, you have a lot of experience on the push and pull factors. This administration has mastered taking the problem to Mexico. They keep going into Mexico and into Latin American countries and saying, how can we help you with this problem? Instead of coming to states like Texas and saying, how can we help you? Because where Texas leads, America follows. And if Texas falls, there's nowhere left to go, right? So we've even seen, like you said, with Mayor Adams, he went to Mexico as well, but nobody's coming down to these border states and talking about the issues that we're facing and why we're facing them. So can you tell us in your professional experience what's going on in Mexico and beyond that is also pushing the amounts of people up here, whether that's with the government, the cartels, coyotes, what's constructing this disaster south of the border?
So there's two parts to it, right? And I like how you phrase that question because you're exactly right. No one's coming down here saying, how do we stop millions of people coming across? I remember just recently when the president was asked, what is he going to do about the border? He said, we're looking for new pathways and ways to go faster. Right. Never once did he say, we're looking to slow it down. We're looking to stop it. We're looking to find ways to make it go faster. So the system's already imploded, right? And so, but let's just keep going. Now we're talking about Mexico. So under the previous administration, great working relationship with Mexico. Had the Remain in Mexico policy, safe third country, whatever name they want to give it, right? That policy was taken away immediately, right? Now, Mexico did that, and Mexico agreed to accept those migrants back under safe third country, Remain in Mexico, because it was financially beneficial to them. Because if they didn't cooperate with us, then there were tariffs and there were other things that were placed upon Mexico. So first, let's look at the government of Mexico. The government of Mexico is making millions of dollars a day off of the migrant crisis. And this is why they're doing it. Mexico knows that they're not coming to Mexico to stay. So everyone that crosses that border into Mexico pays for a permit to travel through Mexico. And if you want to know how much they pay, go to any border town, walk over to the river, and they all drop those permits off as soon as they cross because they don't want proof that they have legal status in Mexico. Because if they have legal status in Mexico, they cannot claim asylum here, right? That goes back to as long as there's been immigration, the law states that you must seek asylum in the first safe country you enter. So if you entered Mexico and you felt safe enough to travel through Mexico and stay in Mexico for weeks or months at a time, then that country was safe enough for you to apply for amnesty there. Therefore, you're automatically not qualified for amnesty here.
It sounds like if people followed that law, Latin America and Mexico would have a lot more people
Correct.
in their own countries.
So the financial benefit to Mexico is they cross, they pay a fee, right, to basically remain in and travel through Mexico. They spend their money as they work their way to the border. When they get to the border, they're usually running low on money. They've been raped, they've been robbed, they have nothing left, and then they come across, and now we're left with the migrants, and we're left to support them. Mexico benefited from it. The businesses benefited from it. The federal government benefited from it. Now the cartels. We talk about the cartels. the cartels control everything. Nothing crosses that border. You talk about armbands. The cartel has such a great business model for what they're doing that they can literally give you, you get 6 rides on this, 6 turns on this ride before you have to pay again. It also lets them know what cartel that they belong to, and so the cartels control a lot of what goes on in Mexico. They have so much control. A lot of people will tell you, a lot of experts in foreign policy will tell you that Mexico is one bad day away from a failed state. And so right on our doorstep. And so we keep hearing the federal government talk about, we're going to go down to Mexico and we're going to go down to Central and South America and we're going to address the root cause. And the root cause is crime, it's poverty, and corruption.
And climate change.
Well, yeah, I wasn't even going to bring that one up because I think it's so silly, but we haven't even solved the root cause in our country. We've got crime issues that are out of control, right? And we're defunding police and we're doing everything we can, not to enforce laws, right? Oh, we're going to change that law, or oh, we're not going to arrest anyone for that. And so we've got district attorneys that just flat out refuse to prosecute, right? Elected district attorneys that refuse to prosecute someone. So we're going to go to South and Central America and help them fix the same problems that we have. We have our own poverty in this country, right? We have our own crime problem in this country. And in some places, we have our own corruption problems in this country, even with the administration. And so you cannot begin to do immigration reform or even make a stab at immigration reform until you secure the border first. You can't fly the plane and then fix it. You've got to fix it before you put it in the air. And I think I heard someone, and I wish I knew who so I could quote him, but I heard someone describe the other day that in the last year alone, the number of fentanyl deaths. Now, fentanyl, we know 100% of the fentanyl entering the United States comes from Mexico, with precursors that are coming from China. If you look at the number of people who have lost their lives to fentanyl poisoning in the United States in the last year, it would equivalent to one 737 aircraft crashing a day. If you had 2 7130 airlines crash back to back, the entire country would be up in arms, shut down all flights, inspect everything. We need to fix this. But you've had the equivalent of one plane a day die from fentanyl poisoning, but the country's not up in arms about securing this border and preventing it. We've got to secure the border first before we can get into negotiations about, immigration reform, right, or working with other countries. And Mexico will take the migrants back. They're required to by law. They're just not being held by the administration to do so.
Right. And with that, we had the Public Health Order Title 42 under the previous administration, which was effective in its time, and we always knew it's not long-lasting immigration policy. It has to come to an end, and it did. We were actually in El Paso for our Border Security Coalition visit when Title 42 ended. And there was a lot of back and forth. Is it going to lead to a new surge? Are we really going to see that decrease in numbers? And for a while, it did seem like there was a decrease in numbers. But looking back, we know that the federal government effectively just changed the definition of illegal entry, legal entry, the pathways that they administered, CBP One app. So could you tell us more about how they have changed that? So that what happened after Title 42, and why did we see the dip in numbers that they claimed to have?
So there was no dip in numbers. There was zero dip in numbers. What we saw was a decrease in numbers of what was coming between the ports of entry, crossing over the river. So I'm going to back up a little bit, though, before Title 42 ended. And I want to back up to January of that same year, and I think it's important. And so January of that year, CBP came out with an app called CBP One. And it literally was a fast pass to illegal immigration. It was, get this on your phone, punch in the number, right? Put very basic, very limited information in. We'll get you an appointment. You show up at a port of entry. We'll process you through. We'll process you through the same way we processed you if you came across illegally, right? We're not granting you entitlements. We're not granting you citizenship. We're not granting you even technically the right to be here legally. We're putting you in a limbo status, and we're going to give you this notice to appear and release you, and then you'll have a court date in 2027. And so if you got to the head of the line. So it came with a lot of rhetoric by CBP that says, if you don't use this process and you come across the river illegally, we're gonna send you back, and you're not going to be able to reapply for 5 years. You must wait. And so what you saw from January, February, and March was you saw a decline in numbers. But the CBP One app was just riddled with all kind of problems. It was a rush. It was and if you go back to around January, November, they were supposed to, Title 42 was supposed to go away, and a court gave a stay and kept it on. And so, originally in prep for Title 42 going away, they created this app. But what it did was it funneled that traffic through the port of entries. So I know some people say, I hear people tell me all the time, well, at least they're going through the port of entry. Where's the problem? When that many people are going through the port of entry, what happens to legal trade and travel? The amount of taxes and revenue that this country is taking from taxes on people that are importing products into this country, it drops dramatically because they start shutting down and pulling officers off of working the lanes to facilitate legal trade and travel, which is economic benefit for the country, and they have them over there processing the migrants. So now, not only are we processing more migrants to come in, but we're also affecting the economy of the country and the economy of the states because the produce, the cars, everything else that gets shipped in from Mexico and other countries aren't making it through.
Well, on that note, quickly, how many times would you say a port of entry has been shut down due to these influx in numbers trying to come through them?
Quite often. I couldn't give an exact number. The federal government had the Bridge of the Americas closed in El Paso, Texas, and today they reopened it. It had been closed since early September. So that's over a month, and that is a commercial traffic bridge. So all traffic was halted through that bridge, forced to another bridge, right, to cross, and so that backs it up. I just saw a report from Mexico today that they said it was 19 days. Traffic was backed up by 19 days, right?
Right. And in your experience, I'm sorry, did you see that this was a phenomenon that happened regularly before this administration?
No, absolutely not. No. And so we saw what appeared to be a decrease in numbers, January, February, and March, which all it was a shell game. We still had large numbers crossing between the port of entries that the Border Patrol was handling, and then we had the other half of what was crossing the day before now crossing over there. So the app didn't work. Well, it worked to the benefit of the administration as far as hiding the numbers, right? But they were still being processed the same way. Here's the problem with that application. One, it was originally designed for parole. Courts came back out and said you can't do parole, which was another process that the government created in order to say we're doing something, right? And as a consequence, which wasn't, parole was just to be released into the country. And so they went back and they tried to change up the app real quick after the courts made their decision. So within about 3 months, the migrants got tired of waiting. They couldn't get an appointment. So they just started crossing. So now you say April, May, and that's when we started seeing the numbers. So a lot of people say the pre-Title 42 never happened. Everybody said we're going to see these massive numbers. Well, we saw them right up to the day 42 ended, because what happened? The administration comes back out again and says we're going to start enforcing Title 8. We have a new law, Title 8. Title 8 is the immigration law that we're taught from day one in the academy. That is what that's immigration law, right?
Right. And can you explain for our viewers what Title 8 is?
So the federal government through their campaign would have you believe that anyone that's processed under Title 8 is processed for removal back to their country. Not true. An NTA OR is Title 8. We were already processing migrants under Title 8. Even with Title 42, we only could send back specific qualifying migrants. So if we had a migrant from any country that did not speak Spanish, Mexico would not take them back. Even though our Title 42 law said we could send them back, can't send them back if Mexico refused to accept them. Mexico would refuse to accept them. So Title 8 doesn't mean that they're being punished. Title 8 means that there's still not a consequence for their illegal entry into the country. They're released with a notice to appear. A lot of people just commonly call it a notice to disappear because you have 5 years, right? Another stat that I want to cover real quick before I finish this is you'll hear people say that 90% of everyone that's coming through right now is being released is showing up for their initial court appearance. Absolute lie. 100% lie. And the reason why I can tell you is because no one that has crossed in the last 2 years that has applied for asylum has had their court appearance yet, because that's how far behind the immigration system is.
Not one person in the past 2 years has had a case hearing yet.
They have not gone through their adjudication. They may have had an initial appearance, but here's and most of them aren't showing up, and they can't tell you where any of them are, right? And so, but what the number is, where they play on the numbers, just like they played the shell game with Title 42, sending them through the POE and saying, look, the numbers went down, is that 90% of everybody that was NTR'd which was a notice to release, which was something that was made up by the federal government. It was determined by the courts to be illegal. Then they went to parole to ATD, which was another thing they created, right? Okay, well, we can't do this one anymore. So every time the courts would tell them they couldn't do something, they'd stick another sheet of paper in the file and call it something else. And so every one of those migrants that were released, they were released without an alien identification number, which is the legal number that you use, a tracking number to keep up with that case. And everything they do, it's almost like a social security number. They use it for everything. 90% of those migrants were absolutely showing up, but it wasn't for a hearing. They would show up to the closest ICE office to where their destination was, because they needed to show up so they could get a full file, notice to appear, released on non-recognizance, and an A number, because that's how you qualify for government services. You have to have that A number in order to be able to qualify. That's your 90%. But let's go back to the 42. So now, all of a sudden, they come out with the rhetoric again. This time we mean it. If you guys cross and you don't apply for this app, don't worry, we fixed the app, right? It's all good. If you don't cross using this app and you cross any other way illegally, we're going to return you and you're going to be forbidden from coming back to the country for 5 years, right? Didn't happen. But what you saw in May, June, July was they're like, okay, I think they really mean it this time, because this time they really came out and said it. So you saw a pause. You still saw people waiting in line. We still saw high numbers, but you didn't see the high numbers between the port of entries. They went right back to shell game, half over here, half over here. So
it was like a conveyor belt through the POEs.
It was. And so in addition to that, they got tired of waiting. And at last count, they were about 1.6 million applicants behind. And so they said, well, we're going to try our luck again. We're going to see if they really mean it this time. So they went back to crossing illegally across between the port of entries. And what happened? The same thing that's happened every day under this administration is they process them and release them. And the minute they get processed and released, right, they're back on WhatsApp, they're back on Signal or any other telecommunications app saying, hey, they released us. We're on our way to New York. All right, now the floodgates are open. At last estimate, there was still approximately 160,000 people along the border, right, waiting to cross, right, in different locations. And part of that is you can do that by determining the numbers that are reported from Mexico from their immigration camps, right? But then we also have drone footage of all the little encampments that have been built across the border. So now nobody's showing up for the CBP One app. A very small number of people are showing up. Everybody else is like, I'll apply, but if I'm not getting in, I'm just going to run across. And I want to go back to CBP One more time, because one of the things that you hear the administration saying is we're creating a humane way for this mass illegal migration to go through a port of entry so that they don't have to pay the cartel. They don't have to associate with the cartel. They don't have to be involved with the cartel, and it's safer for them. The one thing they fail to tell you is if you're in Venezuela, you can't apply on a CBP One app in Venezuela. You must make that trek from Venezuela all the way up to the U.S.-Mexican border, because by law, or by the way the system is set up, the way it's made is you have to be within the border region to even apply. And it's on an app, so they've got the GPS, so you have to literally be on the border. So it didn't take away any of the dangers that the migrants are going through to get to the border, right? And then a couple of weeks after it happened, they shut down doing CBP One apps in Laredo because all the migrants were being stopped before they could even cross the port of entry and had to pay, or they weren't even allowed to go into the port of entry and apply for their application. So this administration this has been the most inhumane administration for illegal immigrants that I've seen in my career, right? But they'll stand there and preach about how they're doing things to make it more humane. Right, but you can see for yourself by the number of deaths that are on the border. You can see for yourself by the number of people that are being raped, robbed, and murdered in Mexico that we don't even have the stats on. Good luck getting those accurate stats. But you can see it. There's not. I invite you. I know you've been down there, but I invite any of your listeners, come down to the border. Come down to the border. I will personally take you on a trip along the river. And if you don't hear a 3 to 5 minute long gun battle at least once a night, then you got earphones on or something. You're just choosing to ignore it. The level of violence that is going on down there, it's out of control. So we create an app that requires people to come down there and then sit in those violent communities while they wait for an appointment, versus going to safe communities such as the camps that were set up by the Mexican government to ensure the migrants were safe, right, with military and law enforcement protection while they waited. And the fact is, Mexico didn't have a problem with remaining in Mexico, because as soon as they realized that they weren't going to be released and that they were going to have to wait in Mexico for their asylum hearing, they stopped coming, because they know as well as we do that they don't qualify for asylum, right? They're coached on what to say, but well over 90% of asylum seekers throughout the history of asylum seekers in the United States, I won't say this history of asylum seekers, it's the history of my 23 years in there, well over 90% are unfounded and are not qualified and are returned.
Yeah, we've essentially decimated our legal asylum system. Little of it exists anymore. But on that, I would like to transition to barriers. So the Mexican government is not too happy about walls and buoy barriers, and that's okay. We're not here to please the Mexican government. But when I was down in Eagle Pass, I was able to see the buoy barrier system with my own eyes. And it was kind of underwhelming, actually, because you hear all this fuss in the news, certain outlets that like to talk about, again, the inhumanity of it, and we just hate Mexico and we don't want people to come over. But it's like you said about the deaths. This barrier not only prevents illegal entries, but saves lives. And DPS made that very clear. We've had no more crossings in this area. We've had no more deaths in this area. They'd like to see that happen in other parts of the border along the river. But what was interesting was they were very clear that that part of the river where the barrier is at is not a safe place in Mexico. And we saw that. We saw a few small man camps, essentially, of some sticks and blankets and buckets. And you can't confirm who they are, but you can kind of guess that maybe there's some sort of lookout, saying, okay, we have this many here today, or the force is smaller, now they're trying this, what have you. So the way I see it, the barriers are deterrence, and deterrents are effective. And we support the state of Texas in placing any deterrent that we can do within our constitutional authority. So can you talk more to what deterrence has the state of Texas put in place to include the buoy barrier? And even though, Mexico kind of threw their fit in court, what can we expect to see from the state moving forward?
So, couple things. All right. So obviously we have to wait until the court case plays itself out on the barriers. But should we win, we have every intention of increasing that. It is a very effective tool. It's very cost efficient to the taxpayers. Those barriers were tested while I was in the Border Patrol. They were contracted to be put in the river by the Border Patrol. Contracts were signed off on. Everything was good to go. New president comes in and says, that's considered infrastructure. I will not put a single mile of any type of infrastructure. So they halted it. So in talks with the governor and talks with DPS and talks with TMD, I'm like, hey, the federal government spent millions of dollars getting these things designed and tested and evaluated, and they put them in the pool at their academy and had their special operations guys try to breach them. Why not take advantage of the money they spent on it, right? And let's do a test, right? So we put that test string out there. Very effective. I am going to say that I did a couple of interviews with media after they came out about it, and I gave numerous demonstrations to prove, right? And the biggest thing is chainsaws, table saws, whatever they were called, absolutely absurd.
Right.
It is a device designed to be in between the buoys to keep someone from going in and tampering with the buoy and separating it.
I rubbed my hand up and down them a few times and not a scratch.
I leaned into it with all my weight, and I'm not going to say how much I weigh. I think I did on one of the interviews, but I leaned in. I did 8 interviews back to back, leaning as hard as I could into it. Never broke the skin. And one of the reporters said, well, what if you rub it back and forth? So I rubbed it back and forth. There's nothing sharp about it. It's not what it's designed for. But it goes back to what you said. It is a deterrent. And every migrant that we deter from even getting in the water is a potential life saved, right? Worth it. Every migrant that we have not cross, that's significant. And so buoy barriers are, we're in a hold status waiting for the courts, and we'll see where that goes. I will say this, because the governor's publicly said this, that we'll fight that all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to, for Texas's right to defend itself. And so we are building border wall. We're building border wall to the exact same specifications as the federal government was building their wall prior to this administration coming in and putting a halt to it. We're even using some material that we were able to get from the federal government before they found out we were getting it and tried to stop it. And then we're also putting up tactical infrastructure, whether that be in the form of razor wire, concertina wire, right? It is effective. It does deter people wanting to make that that crossing. And I want to give you a stat real quick that I am very proud of. I looked it up right before I came in here, and I wrote it down. So I'm going to go to my notes for the first time, but I want to bring this up. So I'm going to use yesterday's numbers. Yesterday's numbers, there were over 6,100 crossings on the U.S.-Mexican border.
And to clarify, could you say the date for that?
So yesterday would have been the 10th?
Yes.
Yes. So yesterday, October the 10th, there was a little over 6,100 crossings in between the port of entries. That's apprehensions, right? So that's not counting gotaways. Of those 6,100, Texas apprehended 2,600. Now, you remember a couple of weeks ago, we were doing 2,600 a day in Eagle Pass.
Right.
So 2,600 in a 24-hour period. Not declaring victory. We got a long way to go, but that's a significant improvement, right? Now, Texas is that 2,600 is about 43% of what crossed yesterday. The remaining 57%, which is a little over 3,500, they crossed in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. And I think the important part of that is the state of Texas owns 62% of the land border with U.S. and Mexico, 1,254 miles of the almost 2,000 miles across. So we own 62% of the crossing, but we only count for 42% of the crossings, whereas the remaining 38%, California, Texas, and New Mexico, count for 57% of the crossings, right? And so I'd like to deter them from crossing anywhere, but first and foremost, I'm going to deter them from crossing in Texas, and we're going to do everything we can to continue to raise those numbers. We'd like to see them be deterred from attempting to cross, period. But if California, Arizona, and New Mexico had to deal with what Texas has been dealing with for the last 2.5 years, I think they would have a change. And I think that if we can continue to encourage that traffic not to cross in Texas, we'd like to encourage not to cross at all, but if it's still going to cross because the open border policies are inviting them, and they cross in Arizona, California, New Mexico, I believe that's going to force California, Arizona, and New Mexico to do exactly what Chicago's doing right now, exactly what New York's doing, and saying, okay, wait, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this anymore. This is not sustainable, and it's not. And so a lot of that is through our deterrence. It's also through our criminal trespass, right? It's I said on day one when the governor introduced me at one of at the press conference, and we did it where they were building the wall, I said my number one priority is to make Texas the least desirable place for illegal immigration to happen, right? I'm not waving a victory flag. I'm not saying we're there yet, but I'm saying we've made huge improvements. And through deterrence, through prosecutions when we can, and through repelling migrants, we've seen that. We're starting to see the numbers go the way we want them to go. And I believe it, while it's not, again, waving the victory flag, it is a measure of success where we can see that migrants are making the decision to go to these locations. And I've asked 23 years, I've made some good friends in the Border Patrol. I get asked daily, how does it feel to have to leave the Border Patrol to be a Border Patrol agent, right? Referring to being able to work in the state of Texas with what the governor and the team are doing. And I ask them all the time, hey, can you ask the migrants why they're crossing there? And they say, I want to cross in Texas. It's too tough, right? They got wire, they got buoys. The buoys have chainsaws on them, or whatever they're saying. Okay, well, hey, if those stories, right, are keeping people from crossing, and they're safer because they're not crossing that river, then it's a win for us. And hopefully it will bring that attention to other states to force them to stand up for themselves.
And I think those measurements of success are really important to point out because Texas is so large. There's a lot of different stats when it comes to illegal immigration, border security, where people point out Texas and California, we have the most this, we have the highest amount of that. Well, we also have the largest states in the country and the largest parts of the border, right, of the southern border. So our numbers are going to be bigger. So we do need to clarify those success measures and show these procedures, they are effective, and this is why, and these are the numbers. And so thank you for pointing those out for us.
And I did get a little ahead of myself. There's one last measure of prevention that we're doing. And one of the things we're doing is we're also doing a lot of patrols on the river with both Texas Military Department and with DPS in the form of boats, right? And then the other thing that we've received a lot of help from, and I would be remiss to not give a thanks to all the states that have helped, but we've had,
which I believe is up to 14 now,
14.
Right?
We've had 14 states come down to Texas and help us. And we kind of try to not bring them all at the same time, so that because we know we're going to be in this fight for a while. And I think it's important to understand that all 14 of those states, their states' taxpayers are footing the bill for whether it be law enforcement in the form of state troopers, whether it be soldiers in the form of their military department, whether it be investigators, whether it be other state officers, the marine conservation, their wildlife, state officers coming here. And a lot of that stems from, we've had a lot of governors say, hey, fentanyl. That's their first concern. All this fentanyl is getting to Florida. All this fentanyl is getting to Oklahoma. Hey, as far as way to South Dakota, all this fentanyl is getting here. How can we help? I said, come down here and help us stop it at the line. If we can stop it before it gets across, right, you have more success in preventing it from getting into your communities than you do sitting on the highway and trying to pick out that one vehicle out of thousands and hope that's the one that has the fentanyl in it. And they heard us. And they've been down here, and they've been huge. We had a few of the governors come down recently, and he said, I was really interested in talking to my soldiers and my troopers, and I thought they were going to tell me, okay, we're ready to come home. They were asking to extend.
Wow.
And he said a lot of them were asking to extend, not just because they were enjoying the mission, but they saw the real purpose of it, and they were like, we didn't realize it was really as bad as we didn't realize it was this massive. That they had no clue, right? And so one of the things I would always tell them when I go out and meet with them and talk with them is I would always say, I encourage you when you get back home, talk about what you saw down here. Talk about it every day. Talk to anybody that listen. I don't care if whatever your grocery store is there, the Piggly Wiggly, the H-E-B, the Kroger, whatever they have there, talk about it and spread the word and let them know what you've seen firsthand. Not what you've heard from, one side of the media or the other, but from what you've seen, right? And so again, border security is national security, and until we get people to realize this isn't an us versus them, this is protecting our sovereignty. It's making sure we know who is coming into our country. We know what is coming into our country. And we have the ability to prevent anything that's gonna harm us from getting here.
And I think that's something a lot of people, even me working in policy, didn't realize off the bat with the cost of Operation Lone Star. We kind of just think personnel, cars, boats, helicopters. But when we go down and we talk to the stakeholders along the border, for example, in Kinney County, they were completely overrun with human smuggling attempts, drug trafficking, criminal trespass arrests, and the adjudication process really got backlogged at one point.
Right.
But that emergency funding that the governor allocated went to things as simple as getting Microsoft Office on their computers that could handle all of the work that they needed to be doing, different internet programs, and that really helped them catch up on these logs and now be prepared for whatever influx might come again. So this funding, I think is important to point out that it goes to so many different things that all lead to the success of this mission, and we all want this mission to be successful.
I agree, and you talk about another part of the grant is trying to make ranchers whole. You've got a ranch out there, and that is their livelihood. That is how they support their family. They provide, beef and for the people of the country, and people don't realize. They're like, well, so they were chasing somebody and they broke through their fence. Okay, well, 6 cows got out today and they can't find them. He spends $5,000 repairing the fence. 2 days later, the fence is busted down again and again and again. I mean, I've met with ranchers and seen the documentation where there's ranchers that are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from constantly repairing their fences, and they're selling their family ranches and their family farms and just giving up and moving out because they can't afford to sustain life, which again hurts us because now we've got to go outside of the state to look for produce, and we got to go outside of the state to look for our meats. And so look, immigration made this country what it is. It's a great thing, right? But we've got to be able to control and ensure that we know who and what is coming here. I can't say it enough. It's so easy. People forget about 9/11. Let's look at what's going on right now in Israel, with people coming across their border to do violence. I'm not trying to draw a panic picture, but
it's concerning.
1.9 million known gotaways, and those are people that did not surrender because as wide open as the border is, they still wouldn't have been released. So they had something that was keeping them from just turning themselves in and becoming known, and that is that. If that doesn't concern someone, then I don't know how to convince someone that we've got to secure the border.
Right, and to add to that, the over 70,000 special interest migrant apprehensions that we learned about this morning. So it is very concerning, and I thank you for getting out there and spreading the message. Before we close our conversation today, I just want to reiterate some alarming stats, really. As I noted in Operation Lone Star, over 473,900 illegal immigrant apprehensions, more than 34,800 criminal arrests, more than 31,800 felony charges reported, and the most alarming for me, especially because I have young kids, the Texas law enforcement has seized over 431 million lethal doses of fentanyl. And we also saw recently the report from CBP about the staggering number of fentanyl seizures in between and at ports of entry. So with those stats in mind, sir, could you just tell us what you want the people to know as we wrap up this conversation, and what the state of Texas is going to do to secure not just our state, but our nation?
So I think the most important thing, and I'll use another stat that CBP likes to use, and CBP will tell you that 90% of all the narcotics seized by CBP is seized at a port of entry. So what a lot of people say is, well, 90% of all the narcotics are crossing the port of entry. That couldn't be further from the truth, right? Just if you have Twitter, just go on any chief on the southern border's Twitter page. They're posting drug seizures every day. What the stat is telling you is that 90% of what they apprehend, that number is much higher today than it was. It used to be significantly lower, but when you don't have anyone there. So the cartel, again, they're smart business people. They have a business model, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. They're bad people. There's nothing good about them.
But they're very organized.
But they're very organized, right? And they use our own rules against us, our own policies, right, against us. And so, if you're a cartel member, and you've got hard narcotics to push across the border, do you go to the port of entry where you know 90% of your product is going to be seized because they've got X-rays, they've got scanners, they've got dogs in every lane, right? And you're funneled into this area. Or do you go where you know that the patrol agent in charge of Wesco had to leave 36 miles of his border wide open, and you know that you're not going to encounter anyone? That's where you're going to push your drugs through. You're not going to push them through where 90% of it gets seized. So it's a totally false number. The amount of drugs that are getting across the border that are going undetected, just the amount we've detected but not been able to apprehend, would bring that 90% way down. And so fentanyl is the worst, deadliest drug we've ever seen in this country. I applaud the governor for getting fentanyl deaths changed to poisonings, because that's what it is. And so, I mean, cartel members have been recorded saying they don't care if it kills their customers. They don't care, right? Get it through, make the money, move on, right? And so the state of Texas, we're stepping up, and we're going to continue stepping up. I talked about the successes we've had, right? We're just getting started. We're not going to stop, right? I don't want anyone to feel like we're going to sit back and go, well, we're stopping some, and well, we're catching some of the dope. No, 432 million lethal doses, right? And that's just what
that otherwise would have made it through undetected, right, if not for Operation Lone Star. That
would have been throughout this country, right? It would have hit all our major cities, and then it would have fanned out in transportation hubs, and it would have went all over the country. 432 million. That's just what we've seized, right? What's gotten away, right? And so people ask me, how do you just judge success in OLS? And I was like, I go back to the old saying, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, right? We are making progress. We are pushing forward. And everywhere we find something that works, we double down on that effort. We try something that doesn't work. We go, well, that didn't work. We're going to have to find something else. And we're going to keep pushing, right? And, I kind of joked around when I retired. I got 24 hours of retirement. And I couldn't be happier to do this job. I would like to retire at some point in my life, but I'm very happy with what I'm doing. I'm very proud of what I'm doing. I am very proud of what the state's doing. I'm very proud the governor's given me this opportunity. And so we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep pushing. Like I said, we're building wall. We're going to put up more tactical infrastructure. We are actually, and we pushed a lot of the migrant traffic in El Paso over to New Mexico, and we saw they were just coming around and button hooking back in. So now we're putting tactical infrastructure going north along the Texas-New Mexico border, right, to encourage them. If you come around, you're going to have to go a long way north. You might want to go over there. Maybe New Mexico won't.
And that message will definitely spread.
It will. And it will spread. Every time we have a success, just as quick as we pat ourselves on the back. Okay, now how do we repeat that success? How do we build upon that success? Everywhere the migrants fail to get in, they're letting everyone know, don't go here, go somewhere else, right? It's not going to work here. And so we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep fighting. And, you've got a great team with Director McCraw and DPS, General Solser with TMD, and then Mr. Kidd over at, the Director Kidd over at TMD, our TDM, and then Texas Facilities. You're going to see a lot more wall going up now. A lot of it was real estate and easements, right? And once we got that out of the way, now you're seeing go up. Right now we're looking at about a half mile a week is what we're putting up, and we're looking to be up to about a mile a week by the end of November moving forward.
And how many miles have been built?
So I don't have that exact number yet. At last count, it was less than 20. But again, the first year and a half of that is a lot of real estate and a lot of easements and getting the land bought so that we can put that through there. We have enough easements right now where we could put up another 60 miles, right? So right now we're getting to a point where we have, we can start building, not stopping. Before we get some space, build and stop, build and stop. Now we're going to be able to continuously build, and that's how we're getting up to that half mile a week. We'll be up to a mile a week by the end of November, and then just keep moving through the new year.
And Texas will continue to build on that border security toolbox.
We will, every day.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and we support you, and we're thankful to you and the governor for taking the lead on this and protecting Texans and all Americans. So we hope to have you here again, and thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.